The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
My honor to introduce Jimmy Schindler, owner of Bandidos, to you tonight. And he's going to talk all about himself. So if you want to know more about Jimmy Schindler, get your pocketbooks out, go out in the front lobby and buy the book. Because he's written 6 of them, 5 of them. One's coming out, and it's going to be a book of poetry. So he's got a lot of books that he's written about his life and about some pretty exciting things. I think we first met back when you owned Jimmy's Pizza. And I was in between businesses then, and I saw an ad for those vinyl repair kits. And so I bought one, and I went into Jimmy, and I said, let me fix your booths. And he said, okay. And I think that's where we first met. And then I saw him years later at the Bandidos Northcrest. And in the bar, he would always sit down, and they had a recessed area. And you would always sit down there, I think, with either family or friends. I think it was probably a lot of friends. And I thought, boy, I wonder how you get in the inner circle for Jimmy Schindler. So maybe I am kind of in that inner circle now. But I'm really happy. You know, when he made that switch over from Italian to Mexican, he was an innovator in his field. It wasn't like today where you can't go 2 blocks without passing a Mexican restaurant. And but you know, in spite of all the competition that's grown up in Fort Wayne, Bandidos still maintains the number 1 spot in everybody's mind when you talk about Mexican restaurants. And it's because they have damn good food, right? Okay, let's listen to his story, and he's going to talk about his rise to where he's at today. So, Jimmy, it's all yours.
If you clap after I'm done, I'll be a lot happier. Okay, in 1934, in the midst of the Great Depression, my mom and dad and their 7 kids lived way out in the boonies in Jay County. And Dad was an alcoholic.
Get a little closer to the microphone. Pull it up a little closer.
You can't hear me?
Bruce said it's kind of quiet.
Okay.
A lot of noise coming.
But anyway, Dad would take off. He was an alcoholic, and he would take off for a few days or a couple of weeks, whatever, with the excuse he was looking for a job. And in a couple of days or weeks, he would come back home, and he would accuse my mother of doing everything that he was probably doing, and then he would beat the hell out of her. Stick around for a day or so, then he'd take off. Well, this went on for about 5 or 6 times, and right after I was born in 1934, he came home, and he looked at me and he said, he doesn't look like me. So he took off, never to return, much to everybody's relief. You know, Mom was now stranded in the country with 8 kids when I was born. Yeah, and no job, no money, no transportation. A lot of times, if it wasn't for the kind neighbors, we probably wouldn't even had anything to eat. So, Mom decided that there was a Catholic orphans home. We were Catholic orphans home in Fort Wayne here, St. Vincent's Villa. And she decided that since she couldn't take care of these kids, she would take them up to St. Vincent's Villa. And My first memory, and I'm telling you this, I was 3 years old, I can remember this, was the day she took us to St. Vincent's. I remember the nun came out and met us, and she talked to Mom for a little bit, and then we all started to walk towards this big building. It looked huge to me as a little kid. And my brother Joe, he was 2 years older than I, he threw himself on the ground and started to scream and holler. And I was holding on to my mom's cotton dress, you know. I wasn't crying, I was probably terrified, but I wasn't crying because I yet didn't realize what Joe probably already realized, that we were going to be left there. Just a second. To Joey, that experience was so horrific that he never forgave my mom for the rest of his life. He never forgave her for that. I like to think, like I told you before, that she took us to St. Vincent's because she knew we would get 3 meals a day, a good education, and a warm place to sleep. The worst part of being in the orphan's home was the missing your parents. Well, my father wasn't around, but missing my mother. I remember when I would go to bed at night, I would feel kind of lonesome, I guess, and I would pretend. I probably shouldn't tell some of these stories. You'll think I'm nuts, but I would pretend that my mother was tucking me in at night, and I don't know why, but that always made me feel better. One other thing, and this is I don't know what you're going to think of it, but when my feet were cold, when I was in bed and my feet were cold, I would reach under the covers and rub my feet to keep them warm. And I would pretend that the big toes were Mom and Dad, and the little toes were my brothers and sister. There were 8 of us, you know. And like I say, I don't know why, but that always made me feel better. And I also would pretend, here I'm 3, 4, 5 years old, that I was taking care of them. And that's, you know, I don't understand that. I believe the psychological damage done to the kids when they were dropped off at the orphan's home was the worst thing that could have happened to them. Because a lot of the kids really thought their parents dropped them off because they didn't want them. And in many cases, that was true. But the kid thought, if my parents doesn't want me, there must be something wrong with me. And that psychologically, that was tough to handle. I gotta have my notes or I'll skip stuff. At the orphanage, I always wondered what it would be like to live in a home with a mom and dad, you know. And I would pray, dear God, please let my mom and dad get back together so we can be a family. And when I asked the good nuns, I would say, they always said, God will answer your prayers. And I often said, He's not answering my prayer. Why isn't He answering my prayer? And they said, well, things would always work out for the best. And I believed them. The nuns were well educated. I'm laughing because I'm getting a kick out of this one. They were well educated, and every time I would ask them a question, they always seemed to know the answers. And I thought, boy, they know everything. And the day I finally realized, well, I thought I was going to know everything when I got older. And the day I finally realized that I would never know everything, it was a bad day for me. You know, it really was. Some people have asked me, wasn't it awful growing up in the orphan's home? And they were surprised when they said, no, it wasn't too bad. Of course, sometimes we're better, but there were plenty of kids to play with, you know. And we were treated pretty well, considering that at the time I was there was about 300 kids, you know. And without a structured, disciplined atmosphere, things could have got out of hand real quick, you know. So considering all of that, it was a good place to be. When Joey was a kid, my brother Joey, he used to wet the bed. And the thinking in those times was, if you wet the bed, you were just too damn lazy to get up and go to the bathroom. And so the nuns were not too kind because that was the thinking. They thought they just wouldn't get up. Sometimes this happened. They would make the kids that wet the bed stand in the hallway with the sheet, the pissy sheet over their head. And I really felt bad when Joey would do that, you know. But just think, the other kids would make fun. Someone would call him fish or other names. But just think how he must have felt. And on the 6th of December was St. Nicholas Day. And every year on the 6th of December, we got a gingerbread cookie. The gingerbread cookie was about 6 to 8 inches high. It had a face made out of frosting and a jacket made out of frosting. Everybody got one except the kids that wet the bed the night before. So Joey and I had a plan. No kidding. I was I think this happened in 3rd and 4th grade. We did it twice, 2 years. Joey was he was older, so it was probably his plan. But he was going to, when everybody went to bed, if you were caught up after you're supposed to be in bed, you'd be in trouble, you know. So after everybody was in bed and he thought they were sleeping, he would come over and wake me up, and we would go into the bathroom and sit in one of the stalls. Now they shut the heat off at 11 o'clock at night, and they wouldn't turn it back on till like 5 in the morning, so it got a little chilly. And we would sit in that stall, and he would read me stories, so we'd stay awake until an hour or two, and we couldn't keep our eyes open any longer. Then we would go back to bed. Well, the next morning when we got up, I was so happy. I ran over to his bed real quick to see how he'd be, you know, see his face. And I saw him, and I thought, something's wrong. And he had wet the bed. And he told me he couldn't help it. He said, I didn't even know it. So I gave him half of my gingerbread cookie. But I want you to know, I kept the biggest half. Here are some of the lessons we learned at St. Vincent's. In the classroom, we learned not only what counts, or how to count, but what counts. We were taught the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule, and we were expected to live by it. We were taught respect for ourselves, and respect for others. We were taught yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, no, sir, and no, ma'am. We were also taught to say please and thank you. We were taught to make our beds and to keep our things clean and tidy. We were taught personal hygiene. Wash your hands after you go to the bathroom and before meals. And bathe regularly. When you were put in the cottage with 30 other kids, you learned very quickly how to adapt, or you suffered the consequences. You know. This is good. We were taught fair play, but there were when kids got in a fight, even the nuns and the priests would run outside to watch it. You know, back in those days, that's, you know. And the rules were like the Marquis of Queensberry's. I don't know if anyone's familiar. The rules when they have a boxing match, that's the rules they follow. And there was no kicking, gouging, biting, or hitting someone when they were down. The same rules. And they were strictly enforced by the onlookers, no matter who you were rooting for. You couldn't break the rules. No. And the fight couldn't start until both fighters were ready. No sucker punches. I must have been in the 4th grade when 3 of my friends and I were assigned to mop and wax and shine a hallway, which must have been about 6 feet wide and about maybe 40 foot long. And when you got done, when you did something like that, you go knock on the nun's door, and she would come out and check it. So we heard the kids playing outside, and it was driving us crazy. A nice sunny day, and we could hear all those kids. So we gave the hall a lick and a promise, and I think we broke a record for getting it done. So I go up and I knock on the nun's door. She comes out. She looks at our lick and promise, and she says, "Do it over." Or she saw no promise in our lick. And this taught me something. If you're going to do something, do it the best you can. Because if you do it right the first time, you won't have to do it the second. Where were we? We also learned if we misbehave, there was a consequence. If you misbehaved a little, not too bad, you'd have to maybe wash dishes for your whole cottage. That doesn't sound bad, but there's 30 kids in the cottage. And if you really misbehaved, you'd get a what they call a licking, spanking. It wasn't too bad. I got a couple of them. Matter of fact, one day a kid did something, and the nun thought I did it. And so the worst thing in the orphan's home was being a rat, tattling on someone. So instead of tattling on the kid, I took his licking. But when she was spanking me, it really didn't hurt because I was thinking of all the things I did while she was spanking me that they never caught me and I never got a licking for. That's true. Of the lessons I learned at the orphan's home, probably the most important, at least I think so, is we are responsible. You are responsible for your actions. No excuses. In the summer of 1945, I just got out of the 5th grade, and they took us out of the orphan's home and sent us, I don't like my throat so, and sent us into to Elyria to live with our dad. Yeah, thank you. You can tell by this I don't yell too much. Yeah, we were afraid and we were happy when they were going to send us to our father's. I was afraid because the orphan's home was our home. We didn't know any other home. And I was happy because they were going to live with our dad. At our dad's house, he lived in a shack. This is a true story. A shack along the creek in the industrial area of Elyria, Ohio. And like I say, he was an alcoholic. He delivered ice for the Walton Ice Company. And after he finished delivering ice, he would hang out in the bar until I don't know what time he came home. But one evening, he came home early, and he brought some hot dogs and marshmallows. And we roasted them along that little creek behind the house. And it was probably the best time I ever had with our father. Not because we had much fun, but because we got to spend some time with him, and he paid attention. We were only at our father's a couple months when someone called the welfare and they took us from him because of the circumstances, And so they took us from our father's house, and I would like to stay, but no, they took us and they put us on a foster farm. And the foster farm was a large farm, and we would get up early, milk the cows, feed the pigs and chickens, and do all the chores. And then we'd go wash up and go to school. In the evenings, we'd come home, do the same thing over, plus gather eggs, clean the barn, do all those other things. And we thought everybody works that. That didn't bother us. We thought everybody did that kind of thing. But what we didn't know is the farmer had a mean streak. He had a rubber hose about that long, and I don't know if anyone's ever seen one of those rubber hoses, real heavy ones from the 1940s. They're heavy. And whenever my brother Joe would do something he didn't like, he would beat him on the back with that rubber hose. And the next morning, his black, and I'm not kidding you, would be completely black. His back would be completely black and blue. One day, I came home from school, and my shoes were wet from playing with my buddies. And the farmer looked at my shoes, and he says, "I ruined my shoes, and he's going to have to buy me new ones." So he knocked me down. Now, I was in the 8th grade. I weighed 98 pounds. He knocked me down, knelt on my arms, and kept hitting me in the face. His wife was screaming to stop, and I kept turning my head, so the blows would glance off. And finally, he got tired and just quit. Well, the next morning I woke up, and my whole face was black and blue, and my head was swollen a little bit. So he wouldn't let me go to school. And he told Joy just to tell him I was sick. Well, when I finally went back to school, the principal called me in the office and he said, "Where were you? Why weren't you at school?" And I told him the truth. And he kind of put his arm around me and he said, don't worry. He said, "Son, that'll never happen to you again." And I got to thinking about that, And besides my sisters, I don't think in my whole life up to that time anyone ever put their arm around me, And that was, to me, that was something, just that, a little thing. So the welfare came. A couple of days later, the welfare came to the house, and they went to the farmers. They went in a separate room with the farmers, and they talked to the farmers, and then they called me in the room, and they asked me what happened, and I told them the truth. And they told the farmer, they said, "We'll be back Monday to take these kids away from you." And I'm thinking, why don't they take me now? I can see what's going to happen. I'm thinking, I was scared. And so when they left, of course, I got it again, but not bad enough to show any, marks. So they took us. To Decatur and put us in another foster home. And that foster home was wonderful. It was an old lady. She was about 70. She, over her life, she took care of 17 kids. She also, my 2 older brothers, she also took them in. And she was a sweetheart. She'd bake cakes and pies, and she treated us probably better than the parents did her kids, And about a day or two after we were there, the welfare lady came in, and Joy and I were standing there, and the welfare lady, I can remember her name today, it was Mrs. Nelson. She says, "These kids aren't going to amount to much." She says, "Welfare runs in the family, and they'll be on welfare for generations." And I thought, I'm never going to be on welfare. When I grow up, I'm never going to be on welfare. When my friends that I ran around with, and my school buddies, they would ask me, Decatur's a small town, 5,000 people, and everybody not knew everything, but they knew a lot of people. And they said, why are you living at Teeny's, which was the lady's nickname? Is she relative? And I would say no. But I would change the subject because I was so embarrassed to tell them that I was on welfare, my father was Louis the Drunk, and my family don't want to take me. So I would always just change the subject. Most of my friends were from middle class, mostly working class, worked in factories, and they always would tell me, I didn't, I was in the orphanage home, never got off the grounds. Same way with the first foster home. I had no experience with the outside world. And they told me, and they would say, anyone that makes a lot of money has to be a crook. And I heard it over and over, and this is a true story. And I believed it, And they also told me, if you want to get, this is a good one, they said, if you want to get ahead in this road, you have to get a good education and work hard. And they said, be careful, because if you want to do, or if you say you're going to do something out of the ordinary, people will laugh at you. So a lot of those kids grew up, they didn't want to do anything out of the ordinary because they didn't want to be laughed at. So, if you want to be something, if you want to be successful, you've got to work hard and have a good education. So I desperately wanted to amount to something. So at Decatur High School, my favorite teacher was Sister Agnes Treese. She was a sweetheart. In my senior year, she says, are you going to go to college? In 1952, only about 3% of the high school kids went to college. And I said, Sister, I don't have any money. I'm a welfare recipient. Besides, my dad and all that, I told him, I says, they won't want me. And I told her, obviously, I could afford to go to college, which was the truth. But subconsciously, I was probably an excuse brought on by afraid that I couldn't make it. But she kept encouraging me. She kept saying, you're as smart as anybody. You're as good as anybody. You can make it. Finally, with all her persistence, and she was persistent, I started to believe her. And then, out of the blue, almost like a miracle, a priest from John Carroll University came, and he was recruiting students. And he gave a talk, and after that was over, Sister asked me, she says, how did you like John Carroll? And I said, I like it a lot. I said, I don't have any money. And Sister says, don't worry, we'll find a way. Sister Agnes Treese. A few weeks later, I went to visit my mother, who lived in Portland, about a half hour away. And we got to talking, and I told her about John Carroll. And she says, would you like to go there? And I says, yeah. And I says, but Mom, it costs $500 a semester. This is in 1952. For room, board, and tuition, $500 a semester. And I says, I can't afford that. And she says, well, I'll tell you what. I will pay for the first semester. And I will ask my sister, Tekla, her name was Tekla, who was never married, a spinster, but she did very well financially, if she will pay the second semester. And so they paid my room, board, and tuition for all 4 years at John Carroll, and so all I had to do is pay all the miscellaneous expenses, everything else. So Sister kept bugging me about applying at John Carroll. So I applied, and still thinking, they won't want me. And when I received the letter, it was a letter of acceptance. And I thought, wow. And I showed it to Sister Agnes Treese. And she didn't say a word. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me. She had a smile on her face, and her eyes just sparkled. And I felt like $1,000,000 because I knew how really proud she was of me. And I firmly believe that to this day, what little success I have achieved was in large part due to her. At John Carroll, I didn't take any business courses because I didn't want to be a crook. I'm serious. I still thought that. And I loved John Carroll. I got a great education there. But looking back, I only had one regret. So when my kids went to college, my son and the rest of them, I gave them one bit of advice. I said, I don't want you to do what I did when I went to college. I says, I went to get a degree. I want you to go to get an education. In my senior year at John Carroll, several of my buddies were going down to the naval station to take the test to see if they could qualify to be pilots for the Navy. And they asked me to go along, and I said, well, I'll go along. And I didn't think I'd make it. You know, I had a lot of negative thoughts there, didn't I? I honestly didn't think I'd make it because I didn't take much math. I didn't like math, you know. And but I went with them, and God, miracles, I passed the test. You know, I couldn't believe it. After I graduated, before I had a chance, before I got my orders, matter of fact, I got my orders, I was in a car accident and I broke my neck. Now that was, I was with a friend and we were out drinking, you know, young guys back in the 50s. It was a lot different. And I learned a valuable lesson there. Never ride with anyone who's drunker than you. But anyway, so after I wore a full body cast after I broke my neck. Had the head cut out, ears cut out, you know, face cut out, round, a thing cut out in case my belly swelled, and when I sat down, it would rest on my thighs. And I was 22. You know, when you're 22, you're full of piss and vinegar, and it's all I could do was sit. And I really thought I was going to go nuts, you know. And that taught me another valuable lesson. Sitting around on your ass ain't what it's cracked up to be. Okay. So shortly thereafter, a few weeks, the Army drafted me after my doctor released me. In 2 weeks, the Navy wouldn't take me anymore because I didn't qualify. The Army drafted me. And I served 1.5 years in Germany during the Cold War. And I was a jeep driver, a tank gunner. I was a tank commander of a M48A2. And I was told it was an M48A2 Patton tank, you know. And I was told I was the only non-commissioned officer below a non-commissioned officer tank commander in our regiment. So I don't know if it's true, that's what they told me. So, and I was also a troop information instructor. I could tell you some war stories, but my wife's here, and a private never tells the general. In 1959, I was discharged from the service, and the economy wasn't doing too well. So I had a hard time finding a job with my degree. And after all, there wasn't not a big demand for degrees in social science. Now, since I had a habit I can't break or couldn't break, that is eating. I needed to get a job to until I found them, you know. And so I got a job at Blackstone's bar, bartending. Now, the first night, I'll keep this bar scene short. The first night I bartended, there was a bunch of rowdies, roustabouts. There was a pipeline going through town or just outside of town. And these itinerant workers, I mean, they were rough, you know. They loved to do two things, or three things. They loved to drink, fight, and loose women. That's what they liked, you know. And they were about ready to get in the fight. And my buddy handed me, the guy was training me the first night I was there, he handed me a sawed-off pool cue. He says, go around behind that guy and whack him. And I says, I'm not going to do that. He says, I'm not going to do that. So I walked out from behind the bar and I walked up to him and I says, you guys can kill each other, but you can't do it in here. I said, if you're going to fight in here, you will never be able to come back. I says, you can go outside and kill each other behind. There's an alley back there. If you want to fight, go back there and go at it. So they did it, and they came back in, arms around each other, laughing like they were best friends, and they drank the night away. I mean, I'm holy, look at this. The other thing I did, Jimmy, you don't know this, but I'm a Purdue grad. Boiler up. I took a friend of mine told me you can make a lot of money in the pest control business. So I took did I ever tell you this? I took a correspondence course from Purdue University in pest control. And then I started a pest control business. And you know, you kill, spray for cockroaches and that kind of thing. But I'll tell you one pest control story. Don, the guy that owned the local grain mill, elevator, whatever they call them, you know, every little town had one. He calls me up, he says, Jim, I got a rat problem. It's a true story, I couldn't exaggerate it. He says, could you help me out? And I said, I'll take care of it, I can take care of it. So I went down to the elevator, and underneath the elevator they had a crawl space, which is varied probably from 3 to 4 or 5 foot. It was dirt, you know, not finished. And he pulled the trap door off, and I had a flashlight, and I jumped down, and I heard stuff going on, and I flicked the flashlight on, and I guarantee you, when I first saw it, and the first time I told the story, I said, there must have been 1,000 rats. I'll guarantee you, there were at least a couple hundred. They were gone every way. I just about went back up through there. You know. But I didn't. I stuck it out and set my poison out and did my job. And I quit the pest control business, not because of the rats, but because I didn't like messing with the chemicals. I didn't like those chemicals. You know. In 1952, the average man made approximately $5,000, the average working man. And finally I got an offer. The best offer I got was from the Standard Oil Company. That was for $5,600. And I thought, hell, I can make more money than that. So when I was going to college in the summers, and in high school and college in the summer, I would do drywall and painting. I thought, I'll just start my own drywall company. So in the first year, the first 6 months of doing drywall, I made $6,000, which was more than the $5,600 that Standard Oil was going to pay me for a year. And being a farm boy, man, I was in hog heaven, you know. And I thought, wow, you know, which proved that I could do it. I didn't like drywall business, though. I did well at it. I made good money at it, but I didn't like it. So I kept looking for something. And I had two criteria. First, I had to make at least as much money. And the second criteria was I had to like it more than what I was doing.
You're welcome. You need another one?
Well, so I started doing drywall, and a friend of mine once saw me. He knew I went to college, and he said, Jim, you went to college. He says, why are you doing drywall? He says, you ought to have a coat and tie and work in a nice office. And I says, yeah. I says, that would be nice. I said, the prestige would be wonderful, but I can't eat it. About this time, I was going with a nice divorcee, and she had 6 children, 5 of her own and 1 of mine. And all of my friends told me at that time, all of my friends and family, they said, Jim, if you marry her, you'll never have a damn dime. And I said, if I never have a damn dime, I said, it won't be because of those kids. It'll be because Jim Schindler doesn't have what it takes. So we were married, and she was working at the GE. And she was also receiving welfare to help her make it through. And when we got married, we knocked off the welfare right away. Remember my promise? I will never be on welfare. And the father of the 5 children, her first husband, he never paid a dime. After they got divorced, he took off. She never got a penny in support. And she was trying to run him down. I said, let him go. He was in Texas. I said, let him go. We don't need her. Besides that, he wasn't the nicest person, you know. I said, besides that, it'd probably be better off not to have him around. So, but one day at the GE, when she was working, one of her friends brought a ad out of the newspaper which looking for pizza franchisees. And she wanted to check it out, so we checked it out and went to some of their units, looked at it, got some of their P&Ls, and I thought, if we do this, I think I'd like this better, and I know we can make it at least as much money as we've been making. So we bought the franchise, to make a long story short. And for 8 years, it provided a very nice living for our family. But one night, just after the rush at the pizza place, she came up and she says, you want to go get something to eat? And I said, yeah. I mean, after all, man doesn't live by pizza alone, you know? So I said, where do you want to go? And she said, Manuel's. I changed the name because Manuel's. It wasn't that, but I don't want to embarrass the family. And I says, Manuel's? I says, isn't that Mexican? And she said, yes. Sorry. And I says, I never had Mexican. And she says, come on, it's good. I ate there with my girlfriends, and it was good. So we went there, and it was busy. And when we finally got taken in to be seated at this booth, I was looking here, and in the next booth, there was a guy sleeping. He was in the fetal position, sleeping like he was sleeping off a drunk. And I said, who's that? She said, Manuel. I said, Manuel? Yeah. And then I'm looking over her shoulder at the bar, and there's a little short guy, and he had, I'm not kidding you, had his hand right on the waitress's butt. I'm looking up there, and I says, who's that little guy up there? She says, oh, that's Richard. He's the manager. But she said, sit down, the food's good. So we sat down. The food was good. But as we were walking out, I said to her, I said, you know, I wonder because there are very few Mexican restaurants at the time, I think 4 in Fort Wayne. I says, I wonder what would happen if a guy went into the Mexican food business and tried to do it right. You know, not that we're perfect, but at least we're going to try. You know, if I saw my manager doing that, he'd be out the door. So that planted the seed in my head. And 2 years later, we opened our first Mexican restaurant. Now, you're thinking, what the hell does he know about Mexican food? He's a gringo. But not being as dumb as I looked, I hired a Mexican. We looked around. We looked California, Arizona, these different places for a chef. And finally we found one, Herminio Cortez from Guadalajara. He couldn't even speak English. But he was married to an American girl, and she could. So he would come over, he'd make the recipes, and we would check them out, taste them. If they were really good, she would write them out. And so even though I'm a gringo, those were original Mexican recipes. So anyway, like I say, 2 years later, we opened our first Mexican restaurant, and this year is 35 years. It has provided a nice living for my family. There was a friend of mine. He said, "Jim, I wore this intentionally." He says, "Jim, why do you always wear a Bandidos shirt? This golf shirt?" And I said, "Why not?" He said, "I wear it because if I'm going to advertise for someone, why would I wear Tommy Middlefinger or Abercrombie and Fitch shirt? Doesn't it make sense? If I'm going to advertise for someone, it would be for myself, for our business." And then I had a friend named Henry Hussman. He came from Germany. He was they were a lot more formally dressed over there. And he said, "Jimmy," he says, "you should wear a coat and tie to work." And I said, "Henry, why would I do that?" He says, "Because you would look more professional and have more respect." And I said, "Henry," I said, "if I have to wear a coat and tie to get respect, I don't deserve it." One more story. This one happened 20, 30 years ago. I was talking to a financial planner, and we got talking, and he says, "Do you have an exit plan?" And hell, I never heard of that put that way before. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "If there's a fire, I run for the exit." But really, I've always had a plan. Our plan, Bandidos, is our family business, and I always thought I would have someone in the family take over the business and run it. And I don't know if you know, I don't own Bandidos anymore. My son Jimmy back there, he's the owner. And so it worked out, even though I didn't have an exit strategy. And from when I first started out, I never even thought about making $1 million. My goal was to make enough money to take good care of my family and to keep the wolf from blowing the damn door down. And it was also, I had this, it was also always in the back of my mind. It was how I was ashamed of my father because of the way he was, and how I wouldn't even talk to people about him. And I always thought, when I grow up and become a father, my children will never have to be ashamed of me. About 3 months ago, I'm just about done, guys. About 3 months ago, I found a poem I wrote. I wrote it about a year after I was married to the lady with all the children. And it still has a good lesson, I think, for today, and I'm going to read it to you. It's called Over Deposited. I haven't much money, nor a valuable thing. Still, I have more wealth than money can bring. I have a beautiful wife, understanding and kind. Men would pay a fortune to have one like mine. I have loving children and wonderful friends. Their love is worth more than diamonds and gems. I haven't much money, but the good Lord I thank, because I'm over deposited in the First State Love Bank. Thank you for listening. God bless.
Thank you, sir. Very, very nice.
Well, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bruce Buck, we owe a big thank you to you, sir, for putting this whole thing together and doing this almost on a monthly basis. Been a couple months here, but hey, well, thank you so much to all of you for coming tonight, and Jimmy for hosting this tonight. Great meal and great opportunity to spend some time at Bandidos. So, anyway, thank you so much. Be careful going home, and we'll see you next month. Thank you, everyone.